I will call this meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee of Wednesday, July 22nd to order. And we do have a quorum. We have all directors present. So first thing is the adoption of the public agenda.
Move adoption with the addition of one item I'd like under new business for the library.
Second.
Okay, you'll have to remind me when we get there.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We don't have any petitions or delegations. Adoption of the previous meeting minutes.
Move adoption.
So moved. Second.
Any comments, corrections, etc.? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we don't have any public considerations. Go on to staff reports. Item number 1, ESA development permit application for Hagel.
Move receipt.
Second.
Mr. Chair,
Okay,
I
on
think
receipt.
Annika was.
Mr. Chairman, it's John speaking.
Oh, hi, John. Okay, so you're going to this.
I can speak to this application, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
The application is to facilitate the subdivision of an 8.7 hectare parcel into 4 lots on the Island Highway just south of Henry Road. As the parcel is situated within an environmentally sensitive area, an ESA development permit is required. An assessment report has been prepared by Warren Fenor, which provides recommendations for the protection of fish habitat. And these recommendations have been incorporated into the permit document, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any
I have a
questions,
question.
Jill?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the original proposal for subdivision that went to my APC a long time ago was for 5 lots, was it not? 5 lots, John, through the chair to your planner.
Yes, through the chair, yes, 5 lots. That is the ultimate number of lots that will be created on this parcel. But at the present time, they're hooking lots 4 and 5 together to make a single parcel. And they will create a further subdivision at some time in the future, Mr. Chairman.
So is this in compliance with what the APC has already seen?
Yes, it is, yes.
Okay,
this is in full compliance.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, John. So on receipt of the report, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item B, committee recommend.
Move the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we're going to go down to item 2, 2020 UBCM convention and ministerial meetings.
Move receipt of the CFO report.
Okay,
Second.
on the CFO's report.
Tom will speak, Mr. Chair.
Okay, pardon me.
Tom will speak to this.
Okay, Tom. So
Thank
when staff, excuse me, when staff want to speak, do they not type something in that says, hi, I want to talk, or what?
Yeah, I wrote Tom in there, but
For some reason it didn't show up. Okay, right.
So
Go
thank
ahead,
you.
Tom.
So the report in front of the committee today really speaks to some significant changes that the UBCM is putting in place for this year's convention and meetings with ministerial officials. The report basically is suggesting that we will try to maintain the protocols that we've used in the past, going through the staff here at the regional district for directors, if they wish, to have us set up meetings and manage their calendar, et cetera, but everything will be essentially done in a virtual environment due to the COVID situation. The report suggests that The topics for meetings that directors may wish to have will be essentially those that are of interest at the electoral area level. There's a similar report in front of the board today talking about the regional issues, and so the committee members will see both reports, a little bit different slant on each of them depending on the nature of the issues that you wish to discuss at the UBCM.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any comments? I do when you're done. Any comments from anybody?
Well,
Okay,
I already informed, it's Brenda. Hello. I've already informed Edith that I'm not going to be attending UBCM. Reason being that last year when I attended, and any year I've attended, the provincial government never follows through on UBCM recommendations. And I find little progress at UBCM on issues that affect Area D. And I don't see the value of attending, so I won't be.
okay, thank you. All right, and I have a question, comment to you, Edie. I did send you an email with a request for a meeting, a specific meeting, with the reason for the meeting. Is that good enough for you to transcribe that onto their form and send it in?
I'll be starting on doing that after we're done the meetings this week, Director Abram, and if I need anything additional, I'll let you know.
Okay, but for the time being, that's suitable.
For the time being, it's enough for me to get started.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Mr. Chair, if I can add something here?
Yep.
So just for Director Lee, I'm not sure she's aware, but this UBCM is virtual this year, so attendance will be fair. So, and they also have something fairly unique here, is that the meetings that we traditionally have are not during the UBCM week. So that's a little bit unusual as well. So they're the week before. So what we're planning on is that electoral area directors, issues that they want or have, forward those, and ministers they would like to meet with, forward those to Edie, and she will do her best to accommodate all those, or make applications certainly, and get a response. As usual, the only meeting that is really restricted is the municipal affairs meeting and the premier. So outside of that, feel free to put as many ministers and staff, there's no restrictions and topics towards Edie. And at the board today, we're just going to discuss the topics for meeting with municipal affairs and the premier, because those are the only restrictions we have. So again, feel free to fire off anything to Edie with ministers and staff that you want to meet with. She'll make those requests and get back to you.
Okay, you mentioned, Dave, minister and premier. I didn't see, I don't know if I missed it or what, but I certainly saw the ministers meeting. I didn't see anything about premier.
No, because that's on the board report this afternoon. So
I realize it's in the board report, that there is the minister's report. I have notes on that, but I didn't see something for the premier. Is it separate from the minister, or is it combined with it, or what?
Yeah, no, it's separate, and with the same criteria. Again, the only two that there was a limitation to was the premier and municipal affairs. It's the 15-minute 3-topic one, and outside of those two individuals, you have free run to make requests for any other minister. So at the board today, we'll talk about those two meetings. But here, again, feel free to pass all requests on to Edie, and she'll see how she can accommodate those.
Okay. All right. So anything further on that?
No bad
question, if I might, thank you, Chair. Just wondering if the nature of the ministerial meetings that we might request, do they need to be business that has come before the board, or can they be emergent constituency issues?
From my perspective, I think the EAs have, carte blanche there. I don't think there's many or any limitations on that. The notification we get, it seems to be municipal affairs and the premier are the ones that have, a fairly tight schedule. Outside of those two, I think you're free to make whatever request you like.
Great, thank you.
Yes, and in the past, it's always been, you can make whatever request you want. You have to justify it in your submission, and it's them that's going to decide whether or not you get a meeting or not. So, yeah, but you're not limited to your topics. Okay, anything else on this? Otherwise, just vote on receipt. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, Cortez Island Community Hall funding agreements. Item 3. Report be received by the from the CAO.
Move receipt.
Okay, any discussion?
Annika will speak to this.
Okay, Annika, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item before you is to consider proposed agreements with both the Whaletown Community Club and the Southern Cortez Community Association to fund the core operating expenses for both Gorge Hall and Manson's Hall, respectively. And this is in response to the creation of the service back in November and the following authorization of the board in mid-December to draft agreements for consideration. The contracts have been drafted by the SRD and provided to both of the organizations, of which both have been signed, and we're now in a position to have the regional district execute the agreement so that we can proceed with providing core operating expenses for 2020.
Okay,
Thank you.
any other comments?
Yeah, just as director for the area, I'm grateful to staff. It looks thorough. I've spoken with the community organizations. They've obviously signed and are happy with them, so I'd appreciate support here. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Where am I seeing in favor and opposed or opposed?
You only have to say, are you opposed?
Yeah, we're just doing opposed in chat.
Oh, okay, sorry. All right, so nobody opposed. All those in, let's go ahead then. So it's passed. And we'll move on. Is that it? That's all we
Yep.
need to do? All right.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you just passed the receipt of the report.
So I would move
okay.
B, that the committee recommend that the board approve the proposed agreements for Whaletown Community Club and the Southern Cortez Community Association for funding core operating expenses for Gorge Hall and Manson's Community Halls, respectively.
Second.
Seconder, okay. Any discussion? Any opposed? This is carried. Okay, Quadra Island Community Hall contract, the report
Receipt.
from the CA.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Speak to this, Mr. Chair.
Who, sorry?
Dave?
Annika.
Dave? Oh, Dave, Annika. Okay, go ahead, Annika.
Thank you,
Not that
Mr.
we
Chair.
haven't talked.
We
Shall
have
we
yet to
continue?
talk.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chair. The item before you is to authorize the renewal of the lease with the Quadra Island Recreation Society for Blinken Memorial Park and the Quadra Island Community Center. The agreement is proposed for an additional 5-year term to commence January 1st, 2021. The agreement itself is primarily the same as it was in past years. However, there have been some minor amendments at the request of the area director, just to confirm a few items with respect to activities that are permitted under the regional district's contract and insurance, and some budgetary requirements. It is recommended, therefore, that we authorize the agreement for the 5-year term to commence in January. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Annika. Does anybody else have anything to say? I do, but you guys are first. Okay, so my only comment was back to Annika. I gave her 3 comments. She incorporated 2 or 2 are actually already sort of there. The one that we talked about this morning and before was that had some concern that there is nothing in the actual contract that suggests that there will be any consultation with the area director. And that I had in my previous conversation with Aniko a few weeks ago, it was said that there would be something. It's not there. Apparently, according to our conversation this morning, it's not common practice, but I wasn't really talking about common practice. I was talking about Area C practice. And all I was asking is that if we could insert somewhere, like right now it says, it's further agreed that the services offered are contingent upon funds being available and as approved by the regional district. Okay, well, that's pretty standard language. And I suggested that perhaps if you wanted to insert it there, it could be further agreed. The services offered are contingent upon funds being available. Somewhere in there, if we could insert the wording that said that it is in consultation with the regional or with the area director. So whatever area director is in place, they would have a chance to be directed through this agreement that they would speak to each other before they put forward their budget, which then gets approved at the regional district level. So Aniko is not in favor of doing this, I realize, and I'll say that for you, Aniko, because it doesn't meet the same wording as other contracts with other areas. And I'm personally not concerned everybody be homogenous. There's no reason in my mind why we can't have a contract that says it's further agreed that in consultation with the regional director, the services are offered are contingent upon funds, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, if it's possible, I'd like to have, it's up to you guys.
I would support that as an amendment.
Well, if I can, first, Director Anderson has a comment. She's in chat, and then I'll follow that.
Thank you. I was going to bring sort of a similar, oh, sorry.
John, I'm not seeing these.
Apologies.
Yeah,
I'm going to bring a similar thing up.
I can't hear anything.
Nova just muted herself.
Sorry. My phone just rang. Apologies, I forgot to unmute. I was going to offer some sort of similar comment in the Cortez contracts, but I didn't want to muck with something already underway. But what I was going to suggest was that there be language that was also privileged the community associations, because the language, I don't have it right in front of me, but was very much heavy towards, you know, at the consent of the regional district, et cetera, not by both parties. I certainly wasn't interested in inserting the regional director there, because I thought that the regional director could certainly consult with both the regional district and the association at any moment in time. So I don't know that I would support that, but I do think that it would be a benefit to have language that made the contract a little bit more equal, that said that privileged both the community associations and the district. But I guess it's kind of inherent, and that's why I was quiet when the Cortez one came up.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, there's a few things here. There's a number of processes evolved, as we all know, through committees and board approval that, you know, help ensure that there is that consultation, because we don't get to the point here without consultation with the committees and the directors and the community associations. Having said that, if it's the will that you would like that language put in there, I think we're going to have to consult with legal first before we can put that language in. I'm not confident without that consultation that we can insert that in there. But if it's something that you'd like, we can we can do that, and then bring the agreement back with the recommendations by legal.
Okay, so from my perspective, I don't believe that we do talk about it, other than here at the final moment. So, yeah, unfortunately, you're saying it has to be talked to legal, but it seemed like a fairly simple, straightforward step that you would talk with the regional director, whoever they are, prior to deciding what items you are going to be asking the regional district, to fund in sometimes very large dollar amounts. And it just came up this last year where there were a few things that were in there that had never, ever, ever been mentioned to me by the community association or the regional district, that they were on the plate. And they came forward at the budget time, of course, which time I had to say what's this. So all I was trying to do was ensure that, to avoid that again, that we would just say simple language somewhere that there will be discussion, and then it will come to the board for ultimate decision. Point.
Sure, that's fine. Again, I think that, there is discussion at many avenues with this, but again, if it's something language that you want specific consultation with the area director written in the contract, outside the contract, I'm fine, but if it's language you want written within the contract, I suggest we get some legal advice whether we have that ability to put that in or not. Tom has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was basically going to just reinforce what what the CAO just said. It is unusual in a legal contract to bind the parties to an action of a third party who's not part of the contract. Having said that, there are ways through policy or procedure and protocol, etc., to ensure that proper inputs are in place for managing the operational side of things, independent of the contractual relationship. So that's just a comment I would put out there for the committee's consideration.
Just with regard to your comment, is being a party to the contract not, is it the regional director having to say yes or no budgetary item within a contract? Is that not being a party to the contract?
Mr. Chairman, the parties to the contract are the regional district and the society. They are the legal entities that are bound by the contract and the conditions therein. The regional, the director for the area is part of the regional district structure, and the regional district is certainly free within its own internal arrangements to have whatever processes it feels are appropriate to ensure that there is proper input, et cetera, going forward.
Okay, well, you know what? Just skip it. Forget it. I'm not going to go through all this with having to go through legal and all that. So just the CAO's report is up for receipt.
Director
All those
Anderson,
in favor?
It's okay if we're,
sorry, guys. Just if I could just interject here, I'm not seeing anything come up on meeting chat from anybody.
Okay,
So
well, I put up a
if I'm
comment.
missing, I don't know. I'm just,
Okay,
if John's still there, if you want to enter, excuse me 1 minute, Brenda.
Yep.
John, if you want to just enter my computer, go ahead. Figure out what's happening with meeting chat.
Yep, no problem.
Did Jim push the show conversation button, I wonder?
Where is that? So,
Down on the bottom, show conversation.
bottom under the chat window, or
it's a
Just
little
beside
kind of,
two people.
It's a square bubble icon with 2 lines of electronic text in it.
With 2 lines of electronic text. Okay, I see. These show participants.
Next.
Next one to the left from that, Jim.
Hi, Jim. I see you've got the meeting chat open. I think you just have to scroll to the bottom.
Okay, see now,
Yep.
now it's showing only.
Yeah, but scroll down,
happened.
way down to the bottom. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
For some reason, none of that was there. It was all just a list of names, 12 names of people invited, and that was it. Okay, so now I've got it. I actually did have chat update, but it just wasn't registering for some reason. It was stuck between gears. Okay, so who's speaking right now? Nova or otherwise, or Brenda?
I did put a comment in the chat. I think that the regional director for the electoral area affected by any agreement should be allowed to sit down with staff and preview any proposed agreement before it becomes, a final document. And then, because the way it is now, the electoral area directors are being ignored, and they are elected to represent the interests of their constituents. And, this legal wording that, the contract's only between these other 2 parties and it doesn't involve the electoral director. Well, yes, it does. And we should be able to preview any proposed agreement with the staff so that, so that we can represent our constituents' interests in that when that agreement's being drawn up. And I totally agree with Director Abram. Maybe it shouldn't necessarily be in the actual agreement, the formal agreement, but there should be a procedure with staff that they will consult with and allow the regional director to preview the agreement before anybody inks their signature on it.
Okay, so Brenda, I appreciate that. If you're, it's sort of, as you said, outside the contract. That's fine with me. If you wanted to make that motion and there was a seconder, then we could vote on that. And I don't believe, Tom and Dave, that would require legal opinion, would it?
No.
Staff.
I mean, I believe that happens right now anyways, but if that's the resolution that you want, that's fine.
I would prefer to make it a direction to staff. It used to always be standard practice that the staff would come to the director and talk about whatever agreement was being proposed and make sure that director understood the contents of that proposed agreement before it got sent to the board and signed off. And I would just like the staff to reinstate that practice. I think it's democratic. And it should be happening.
Okay, so then I think if you'd like that to happen, then it would be best to make it as a motion.
Well, I don't want to make it as a motion because we all know what that does. There's 4 of us and there's, 9 more on the board, and things that are in the interest of the electoral areas never get through the board. So I would just rather that staff had the courtesy to talk to the directors before they put forward any proposed agreement. As a direction to staff.
As direction to staff, I have no issue with that.
You have no problem with that, Dave?
Correct.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Excuse me, guys. Could I ask Tom or Dave, would this be a vote of the board or just the electoral area directors if it was a motion?
Sounds like Dave isn't going to jump in, so I will. I think, Mr. Chairman, depends on the wording of the motion. Quite frankly, I'm not trying to be evasive, but if it's just a simple direction that directors would like to see things in draft form before they come before the committee, that's one thing. But if it's a motion that is going to bind staff procedurally to a process that may or may not work, depending on the situation, then it might be something the board would want to have a look at. So it's a maybe, I guess.
Even
I would like to keep it.
electoral.
If I could speak, Mr. Chair, I would like to keep it as a direction to staff. And I would like the staff to work with the electoral directors on these agreements prior, preview them prior to them becoming final. Like we get to look at the, first draft and make comments on it like we always used to for the past 20 years. That's always the way it was. And I think it's only courteous to the directors who are elected to deal them in on what's going on in their area and what kind of agreements are being proposed.
Okay, I would just like to ask Tom and Dave, is that if it was directions of staff, will it then be recorded and it will become sort of common practice?
Yes.
Okay, hearing that, then direction of staff
I think
is fine if that's what you want to do. Pardon?
Sorry, I think
would
nobody comment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you now have access to the chat and could take a look at that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I've asked for a comment for a while. Generally, I concur with what I'm hearing. It's very, very, very common now for matters relating to Cortez to hit an agenda that I didn't know were coming, other than perhaps through knowledge that I have through the constituency. I think it would be really great for that to be standard practice on anything that relates directly and exclusively to a rural area. But I know that we've made that request for a long time, and that is not what's happening. I don't think I support putting the language directly in a contract, but I did put in the chat if there's interest from my other colleagues in putting a motion forward, subject to knowing that that is indeed an electoral area vote. I disagree with Director Lee's comments. I think that often things that are of interest to the rural areas are indeed supported by the full board. I don't share that concern, but I share here for your consideration, if this is something that we want to actually have be a standard practice, that we give direction to that effect. So I put on the floor, if anyone wants a second for discussion, that as standard courtesy, staff consult with the director from the area on matters directly and exclusively related to that rural area.
Mr. Chairman, if I could jump in, you're still on, just so you're.
We're still on receipt of the CAO's report.
Apologies. So this is.
Say?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so could we just vote on that then? Let's do the, we'll get to your motion in a second, Nova, but let's just vote on the CAO's report receipt.
And
Sorry.
Happy to get to mine after the conclusion of item 4 entirely, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so on the CAO's report, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Okay, so yeah, it could go here or there. It's up to you. If you want us to go
Mr.
before
Chair,
B, or if you want
Needs a second.
B.
I move B as presented.
Okay. Any discussion? All
Is there a
those in
seconder?
favor?
anyone opposed?
I thought I heard a second. Okay. Was there a seconder? There
I'll
was no
second B. I'll second B. B is like the contract for the Quadra Community
Sure.
Center. Yeah, I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Did anyone oppose? Okay, it's carries. You have a subsequent. No.
Thank you. Just arising out of the discussion here, it seems like this is the will, from what I'm hearing from my colleagues, that as standard courtesy, staff consult with the director from the area on matters directly and exclusively related to that rural area. I guess it would be before coming to committee or board.
Okay. Do you have that, Edie?
Jim?
Okay, is there a second? Yeah. Yes.
I wonder if I
Graham,
could
go ahead.
make a friendly amendment here and suggest that the word courtesy be removed and replaced with the word practice. Courtesy kind of suggests in my mind that it is currently not courteous, so I think the standard practice might be better.
That's fine. My only caution is just if a director isn't responsive in a good way, in a timely way, that obviously this can't hold up business. That's all.
Well, as long as the action has taken place, if the director's holding it up, then it would just have to move on.
May I have clarification
so
on something,
are
Mr.
you-
Chair? May I please have
Hang on one
clarification?
second. Brenda, can you hold on 1 second,
Sure.
please? No, are you okay with changing courtesy to practice? Your motion.
That's fine by me, and I'm just wondering if there's any other amendment required to just make it clear that this can't hold up business. So consult rather, it's consult rather than, must have consent by or.
Yeah, so consult means consult.
Right, I think that's
consult
fair.
with First Nations. We consult with First Nations. We don't necessarily ask for consent. So it doesn't hold up our process. We give them so many days. This could be the same thing.
Okay, could I have
Okay,
clarification
so
on
is there a
something?
second? You want clarification, and then I'd like a seconder, please.
I'll second
There
it.
is going. Okay, Gerald. Second. Brenda, clarification.
Okay, through the chair to Tom, I want to know, I want to know for sure that if this goes as a motion to the board, that only the electoral areas will be voting on it.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot make that guarantee.
Well, then I think it's foolish to put this motion forward to the board and have it defeated and then have the staff think they've got the whole board behind them and ignoring the interests of the electoral director. So I won't support the motion.
Yeah, I would agree with Brenda on that.
So I would move, well, I guess the motion is, the motion's on the floor. I'd move deferral until such time as staff can determine the voting rights to this motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor, or sorry, anybody opposed to deferral? Been deferred to the next meeting, I hope. Would that be your intent? Mover and seconder?
As staff are able.
Are you not on?
Okay. No one opposed? So it is carried. Okay, proposed grant and aid policy. Dave, I bet you're gonna.
Second to
On
receive.
receipt, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we attempted to do initially here with this grant and aid policy is the board referred it to themselves, municipal services and electoral area services. It has been to municipal services with some comment, and when we brought it back to electoral areas, we attempted to create our own grant and aid service, which the board did not support. Therefore, we've brought it back for comment with the intent that we bundle comments from all the committees and bring a draft policy for discussion to the board. So what I would like then is, again, we produced this as a product of a number of grant and aid policies from regional districts. To get something on paper, there was a number of things that committee didn't like that we've taken and we're going to make amendment to, and same goes for electoral area services. So what you see in front of you, if there's things that you don't like, bother you, things you'd like added, changed, this is your opportunity, I would say, to voice those, and we will put that into a draft policy for the board's review.
Okay, and if I could just throw in a bit of more information here, I spoke with the electoral area administrator for the Okanagan Regional District, or perhaps it's whichever one has Vernon in it. Spoke to them yesterday at length, and they do have two separate functions, being the electoral areas for the smaller, more local grants, and then if there is a regional grant necessary that's a larger amount of money and covers the whole area, then they have a separate one and works well there. But for some reason, our board is opposed to having that. Having said that, and having talked to Dave, basically he's looking for our comments on what we think about the policy, and then he's going to put them, as he said, in the blender and see what comes out at the end. So two comments, if don't mind me speaking from the chair and saying them. So I can't support the policy the way it is set up because of the fact that it is asking that grants and aid be submitted from whomever directly to staff, bypassing the regional director for the area. The way it sits now, I get an email from a group that wants a grant and aid. They say, I'd like a grant and aid for X number of dollars. What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And I forward that grant as
Can I just interrupt you? Can everyone mute? This is being recorded for minutes, and somebody's doing the dishes in the background or something. So if everyone can mute while you're not speaking.
Okay, may I continue at this point?
Yep, sorry.
Okay, so that email comes to me first. I am asked for the grant and aid. I give comment. Usually I'll pass it on. And I then pass it on as Edie and Tom will confirm, I'm sure. I send the entire email and all of the corresponding information about budget and finances and purposes and all of those things goes straight to staff, where it is dealt with at the staff level to see if it fits the criteria for a grant and aid. And if it does, it then gets put on an agenda for the board to deal with. So that is missing in this ERSAT's policy that was put forward. Second one is that is just absolutely absurd, a cap of $1,000. There are very few times that I receive a grant and aid request for less than $1,000. It's almost always over. I mean, if it's might be $1,100, it'd be $700, but very seldom. It's almost always over 1,000. So it would make it totally unworkable for Area C to have a policy that put a cap of $1,000. There should be no cap. That's the way it was in the regional district I talked to yesterday. There is no cap. It's decided by the budget process. If people have put the money in the budget, it's there, then it's eligible for use if it fits the board criteria or the criteria of the Local Government Act. Then it can go ahead. So that would be my comment. Eliminate the cap of $1,000, period. There'd be no cap. Other comments from other directors?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just pulling this up. So yeah, I have a number of specific comments. The policy statement at the beginning of the draft policy reads: the regional district will consider requests for financial assistance on the basis of need, community benefit, budgetary constraints, and alignment with corporate priorities. I would like to see inserted into that alignment with community and corporate priorities, because it might not be a strategic, corporate priority of the regional district to have, access to women's shelter in some community, but it might be a community priority. So I think both are fair. Down into the general number 2, before a request for financial assistance may be considered, the applicant must provide. I'm wondering if the financial statement, as it said, a recent financial statement, if the intent there is to require some kind of third-party oversight, or is that a financial statement from the organization itself? That's not an audited statement, clearly, but is that just an internal organizational document? That's a question through the staff.
I'll answer that. Just through municipal services, one of the comments there was the ownership that this policy is putting on small organizations to produce this kind of stuff. Like if they're asking for $500, they can't really produce these financial statements. So it was direction, I believe, from them to kind of make it a little less onerous in terms of producing financial statements and audited reports.
Yeah,
helps.
and well, there's certainly a point later that speaks to audited reports that I would not support for that very reason. I don't think it's inappropriate to ask for some kind of internally created financial statement. So just wanting clarity on that point. On number 3, says applications for financial assistance must be submitted directly to the official officer, financial officer of the regional district. So I differ a little bit from Director Abram on this. I think that it's very fair for the applicant to directly communicate with the regional district so that we make sure that all applications are on file. It might be that I miss an email, or it might be that I intentionally don't forward an application to the district because I don't want to support it. And both of those I don't think would be appropriate. I think any application made should be received. But I do think that once received by the corporate office or for the financial officer, it should be immediately forwarded to the regional director for the area, who should determine when they come before the board and sort of in what form, and be able, as happens now, to make a collective recommendation once a year or multiple times a year as the regional director sees fit. In number 4, in addition to other matters outlined in the policy, the board will give preference to funding requests. I cannot support the first 2 bullets there for projects, programs, and events that are not typically dependent on financial support from other levels of government and their agencies. A lot of nonprofits are dependent on gaming grants and other standard grants from other levels of government that they wouldn't really operate otherwise. So I couldn't support that. And I completely concur with Director Abram that the cap on 1,000 it just renders the whole fund moot, basically. I mean, often there's only 8 or 10 organizations applying on Cortez, and if we have 30 grand, then we can't even ever give it out. So that doesn't work at all. There's been grants in excess of $10,000, at rare times. So I would remove that cap entirely. And then I'm wondering about the bullet number 4, the relevance of it. It says that do not expose the regional district to significant risk or liability. I'm wondering under what circumstance a grant to a third-party organization would bring risk or liability to the regional district. And if there isn't a reasonable chance that it would, then it seems like that bullet has the opportunity to squash applications that, for political reasons. I don't see the relevance of that. So I'd love comment on that.
Well,
and then
I'll
a couple more comments.
And Tom may add something to it. But there is organizations that we're not allowed to give money to. So if we give money to an organization that we're not allowed to, that creates risk. The other thing is depending on what the organization does. I mean, there's lots of nonprofits out there, and just because they're a nonprofit doesn't mean they do things that are untoward, if you will. I'm not saying that any have, but if you're depending on who you're giving it to and what they're doing with that money, because there's limitations on what they can do with that money. So if they're going to turn around and give it to somebody else that creates liability for us, then we need to be aware of that. So almost all of this is created from putting together other grant aid policies, but I would in fact support that this one needs to be in there for certain, because you need to know what the organization is doing with their money and who they're giving that money to, because there's a connection between us and who they give it to, and that could put us at risk or liability.
Okay, that's fine, and I'm happy to stand down on that one. It just doesn't seem that we would even necessarily know. Number 5, I would delete in its entirety. The board may require an organization to provide written explanation for the efforts to achieve sustainable funding. I don't think that's fair. I think if there's a large grant and aid going to an organization year after year after year, you know, obviously politically that's not going to be supported, but there's a lot of organizations who are just never going to reach sustainable funding. And I would submit that the regional district is even one of those. We depend on our tax base. Is that sustainable? Not. I just don't think that's acceptable. Number 6, I can't support number 1, 3, and 5. Core operating expenses such as rent, lease payment, and utilities. That's a standard thing across all of our rural areas that we support. And in fact, I hear from the nonprofit sector on Cortez that that's one of the most valuable things about the grant and aid, is that so many grants are very restricted in their funds. And this is one of the very few grants that they can put a few $100s towards paying their phone. And that's just really valuable. Number 3, wages, salaries, consulting fees, admin costs equally. Like if we don't allow core and we don't allow personnel and we don't allow capital improvements, I'm not sure what we do allow them for. So this just seems too restrictive. So 1, 3, and 5, you know, insurance, property taxes, office operating, and then you can't do this. All it leaves is capital improvements on your own facilities, and that's just way too restrictive. Last 2 points. Number 7, requests for financial assistance that would provide a benefit only within one or more electoral areas should be reviewed by East before going to the board. So does that mean then that often, especially Area D and sometimes Area C and on occasion Area B have put forward grant and aid suggestions for supporting of organizations in Campbell River, the museum, the Beacon Club, whatever. So do those not come to East first? Do those go to MSC first? I think that gets really complicated when we start splitting. So if Director Lee puts forward, 12 different grants and some of them come to us and some of them go to MSC and some go to the board, I think that's quite cumbersome. So I would suggest that either they all come to East first or they all go directly to the board first, but not to split them up in this way. And then finally, number 10, regional district may require as a condition of providing financial assistance, audited statements, etc. Just, I can't support that. But I do think the clarity on a grant and aid policy would be great, but I know that's a lot of not supports there, but thanks for hearing me out.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And just know that we're making notes on these, so we don't have a resolution, we make notes on all of them. And so based on those comments, we'll bring back some recommendations. Also, there, just so you know, heads up, there may be some things that we cannot do through the Local Government Act providing assistance. And so I'm just going to make this up, wages and salaries. There's many grants that we'll get that we're not allowed to pay wages and salaries in it. So there may be some things that we'll come back with and say they have to be in here because we're prohibited to pay that. To your point on number 7, the intent of that was that grants and aid for EAs would go to EAs, and grants regionally would go to the board, and grants municipally would go to there. So that was the intent behind 7.
Okay, I don't think that's clear.
Okay, sure. And Gerald had, Mr. Chair, Gerald had some comments.
Yeah, I see that. I'm waiting for you to finish talking, and then I was going to ask Gerald to speak.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, with the scope at the top there of the report, it talks about, no, where did that thing go? I've lost it for a second, just one moment.
Scope is in the yellow or orange there?
Yeah. Okay, it was under policy that Nova had commented on briefly, but under policy there where it talks about alignment with corporate priorities, I think that's an extremely subjective phrase. I'm not exactly sure what our corporate priorities really are. I don't think they're written down anywhere. We have strategic objectives, but then not all grant and aid would conform with that. So I think that phrase is just so open to interpretation at the board's whim of the day that it should be deleted. As you go through that list, on almost every one of those, there would be things that I would disagree with, even though most of these don't apply to me personally, or Area A personally. But as far as bringing the request to administration first before they go to the regional director, often the grant and aid requests that I do will come to me first by a telephone call, and I will either tell the person, no, that won't be supported, forget it. Feral Mouse Society is not going to get any taxpayer money. Or I'll say that's a good idea, put it in writing and send me a letter, and then I'll advance it to staff in that way. It would be, in my view, a waste of staff's time to consider and receive and deal with applications that the director in no way is going to support. And then afterwards, if they were to come to the electoral area committee anyway, they're going to be killed there. So what's the point of going through the exercise when things aren't going to happen? They should go to the director first. It used to be in the past that written submissions to staff were immediately put in the director's mailbox or forwarded to the director anyway. So I would like to see it remain that way. Financial statements, some of the few electoral area grants and aids that I have done over the last few years involve First Nations. I don't think that they're able to produce these financial statements you're looking for. And usually they're done on the fly. I often get a request from a municipal director in Tassus or Zabalos who sees a need or has spoken with a First Nations person that has suggested there is a need, and they ask me if I would support something for them. And that's where it originates from. So I don't think that applies to them. What else we got here? The $1,000 limit, I would delete that. That's not practical. Yeah, I won't go through each thing. Much of what Jim and Nova said I would support. I think what we perhaps should have is a Cal meeting on this, so that we can sit down with the board members and hash it out before it actually comes to a regular board meeting for a vote. That'd be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. If anybody has any more to say, I'll entertain that now. And I would also like to say one more thing here. Like there were some things that Nova said that in reading them, I just automatically, in my mind, said, no, that's not on. No, that's not on. But I didn't articulate it here. Thank you, Nova, because you did. And you hit many of them. I including an audited financial statement. That is so insane. To ask a group that's asking for a few $100s to provide an audited financial statement, it's going to cost them more than a few $100s. You know, it's just not on. This is, in my opinion, one of the most bureaucratic pieces of nonsense that has been brought before us. As long as I have been a director on this board for 34 years, we are creating a policy for something that works just fine. If there's pieces of it occasionally that don't work,
they get worked out and it comes before the committee, the board, whatever, the staff, and they're dealt with. Excuse me. The thing that I would like to say is that if you had an objective third party outside this process, looking down at this, they would look at this and they would say, like, who do you guys think you are? Like, you are not, God forbid to use the name, a Donald Trump multi-gazillion dollar organization.
Let's be respectful, staff.
I am being respectful. Donald Trump's not one of our staff. Excuse me. So if I wasn't respectful to somebody, I would apologize. This was brought forward, this is not a staff initiative. This is an initiative of the rest of our board. We didn't bring this forward. Our staff were basically directed to bring it forward. So I'm certainly not blaming them in any way, shape, or form for what they put forward here. They put forward what they were asked to put forward. But why are we being treated like children by our other directors on our board? Which is what this does. This treats all of us as children, as if we do not know how to deal with talking to our constituents, deciding whether or not something should go forward to staff, making sure that it is done properly, and following the law. We have the law sitting right in front of us. And if you don't know what the law, you have staff that you can call and ask. But I think every one of us can interpret what that law says very clearly. It's very simple. The wording is very simple in land aid policies. So, I just totally disagree with the fact that we're going through this exercise. I have submitted my few things and tagged on to a few others from Director Anderson and Director Lee and others that have thrown out some points. So I just really, really object to us having to go to this degree of detail in trying to make things continue to work the way they already work. And we're being put through this nonsense. So anyway, other directors, Director Lee, did you come in after?
Yeah, I'm on the chat after Director Wally spoke.
I just
So
wasn't
I
sure
would like to speak to this.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't support this policy. I don't support turning this whole exercise into a bureaucracy like this. The way I see it, our funds for grants and aid come directly from our electoral area, each of us. That's our property taxpayers paying for services that are to be directed to their electoral area mostly. And there's a few things in this policy that are totally odious. First of all, if the municipalities want to comment on our grants and aid, we should have a regional grant and aid policy, and the municipalities should contribute to their taxpayer dollars to it. Then I would get a say in how other jurisdictions spend their money, but I don't want that. I don't see why they want that. I don't see why any other jurisdiction wants to interfere with, and that goes for electoral areas too, interfere with each of our electoral areas. I don't see that. And 27 years on this board, I've been administering the grants and aid very fairly and responsibly, and there's been no legal problems. There's been no problems at all. And I don't see the need for this policy. I think this is just power and control by the municipalities. And I think it's gone too far with this. So I wouldn't be putting any money into the grant and aid budget that had the municipal committee reviewing my grants and aid. I don't get to review municipal grants. I don't ask to have a say in how they spend their taxpayer money. and they should have enough respect for us to realize that we don't want that either. Another point that if you're looking at trying to fix this, and this is a pretty odious piece of legislation that I don't think is fixable. I think we should just trash it. But my area is on the Oyster River on the south end, and I support interjurisdictional grants to organizations that span the river, both sides, because the river is the center of areas D in the Strathcona and C in the Comox Valley. And for example, the Oyster River Enhancement Society has more than 400 members. They work really hard on volunteer basis to bring back the salmon to that river and to enhance that river. And they've been doing it for years. And every year they get a grant. Every year for the past like 3 years, they've got a grant for more than $10,000 to help them, because it's a huge endeavor. And also I support the Mountain Avian Rescue Society with over $10,000, even though they're located in Merville. The president is from Area D. A lot of the people that volunteer from there are in Area D. A lot of the injured and sick animals that are taken to that refuge are from Area D. So why wouldn't I be able to support them? And that's not covered in this policy. So, you know, I think, and as far as reporting goes, I always get reports back from the organizations. I don't know that they've all gone to the board. I think they have, but some of the organizations report back to me, like the Story Creek Streamkeepers, and where we've put in a $5,000 grant to them in the past, they gave us $25,000 worth of asset and volunteer hour labor. We, you know, they give us value for our money 5 times what we invest in them. And I just think this limit on $1,000 is just insane, totally insane. That you know, the board has no idea how big these organizations are that are asking for grants and how much really positive work they're doing, and it's benefiting the whole region. If the whole region has fish coming and spawning and going out to the ocean, the whole region may have tourism, and they may have other things that wouldn't be happening if these groups weren't working hard. So I'm not in favor. I won't vote. I don't like this policy, and I won't vote in favor of it. And if it goes through, if it ever goes through the board, I won't put any money into grants and aid, because I wouldn't have any say in how they were spent. And this is just a pathological pattern that's happening at our regional district that makes our regional district so unworkable. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And after Director Lee, I have Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like actually Gerald's suggestion of having a cow to discuss this, because it brings an opportunity for everybody who's going to be voting on these matters into a conversation rather than bifurcating us into various committees. And I think that's really valuable. There has been concern by some of our municipal directors for many years around grants and aid, sort of accountability and not knowing what's happening in the various communities and how can you be, you know, recommending and voting if you don't know. And so I would like to find out how to get to the bottom of some of that concern to be able to allay it in a good way. And I think what is most being called for, what I'm hearing from our municipal colleagues, is some kind of reporting back after receiving a grant. And I don't think that's spoken to in this policy at all. And it might be really worth putting in, and it doesn't need to be in any fancy form of audited anything, but a financial, just an internally produced financial statement with a little written blurb about how the money was spent, and I think would be really valuable as a requirement if perhaps a requirement, if an organization is going to apply again, I mean, you can't very well require it before the grant is given, but if an organization is going to come back for a second time, that they provide a simple report on how the last one is spent to build trust, I think would be a really good one and isn't in here. I do differ in my perspective from my other rural colleagues here about the nature of this going before EASC or the board. I think because these are single participant services, in history it defaulted to a vote before the full board, which it still is. And the comments by municipal directors about not knowing what's happening in our rural areas and not knowing how to vote, really it's not a whole lot different than any of us. Like, I don't know more than the mayor of Tassus knows what's happening in the Sayward Valley and vice versa. I don't think just because we're rural directors we have a beat on each other respective rural areas any more than anyone else. So I was quite comfortable with the previous practice of it going straight to the board. That's not what we're doing now, but ultimately the vote is with the full board. And I do think it's really important that the full board finds the measure of comfort that they're looking for in this policy, so that we don't have to go round and round in this or not. I mean, the worst scenario, like Director Lee suggested, that we don't fund grant and aid. That would be terrible. I would hate to not fund grant and aid because we can't come to good working understanding between the boards. So really kudos to Director Wally. I think that's a great idea.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a bar that says comment, please, but nobody's name, and then I've got Gerald. Anybody want to ascribe their name to
My
that?
turn, Mr. Chair.
Or is it Gerald? Go ahead, Gerald.
Thank you. I was just going to make one further comment, perhaps for some staff that haven't been here quite as long as I have, that when I first came as a director, I gave about $10,000 in grants and aids annually, and most of that went to Campbell River organizations. But over time, and it didn't take me very long to discern the direction that the municipalities were headed with this, and in response, I stopped all those grants and aids, and each organization that would phone me and ask me or write me for grants and aids, I'd say, you need to talk to your city councilor, and this is the reason why I stopped. And I would quote some of the things that municipalities were doing that I thought were inappropriate with electoral areas. So that's a historical thing. I don't know if Chair Babchuk is listening to our meeting this morning or not, but the municipality should be aware of that. That's what happened, and that's probably what will continue to happen if they continue on the path they're headed.
So quickly, Mr. Chair, just one on Director Anderson and Director Wally's comment. I'll talk to the chair of CAL, but I think that's a good idea to bring it to a CAL.
Thank you.
Okay, move to defer the whole issue to the next CAL meeting.
You don't have to defer it. These are just comments that we're taking and we're compiling them for recommendation, and we can bring that to CAL.
Okay, so once you get
But
them all down.
Should we not have a motion nowadays that says that after we have, you've compiled all these things, that the Electoral Area Services Committee would make a recommendation that there be a CAL meeting to discuss the results of the compiling?
I would happily move a motion to that effect.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a motion to receive the report still on the floor.
Okay, all those in favor, or sorry, anybody opposed? None, good. Now, second motion, nobody's made it. Is there a seconder to that motion?
Can you say the motion again, please, Director Anderson?
Sure, given I didn't say it the first time, something like that a staff report based on the comments received about grant and aid policy from the respective committees.
Slower.
Sorry, that a staff report. I'm sorry, that's not very good English. That a staff report based on the comments received on grant and aid from the respective committees. Apologies for my English. Be forwarded for a discussion at committee of the whole, or some better sentence structure than that. Because you're getting comments from MSC on this too, aren't you?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a seconder?
I'll
Or not?
second that. I will.
Sorry, you said you will, you won't? What did you say?
I will second it. Second.
Okay. So Brenda is seconding the motion,
On-
and I'm going to vote against.
Okay,
Go
on
ahead.
time and place, considering that we're halfway through 2020, I have spent half of my grant and aid budget already, and I've got the rest already lined up and committed. So before this policy even comes in, most of the 2020 grants will have been dispersed. And I think that this COW meeting should address should address a future budget after we have some strategic plan discussions. Maybe we'll have a strategic plan before the end of the year, and then we can talk more about how GIAs are handled for 2021. But 2020 is, mostly over, and this policy, if it comes in 2020, isn't going to affect the grants that have already been dispersed. So I think the timing needs to be determined as to when is the best timing to bring in any kind of change to grant and aid policy. I think it's at the beginning of the financial discussions when we're setting our 2021 budgets, not now.
I think. Would you like?
Yeah, sorry. I think that's ultimately up to the board, though.
Pardon me?
I think that's ultimately going to be up to the board, though.
Yeah, but practically speaking, there's not much grant and aid left for the board to decide.
Yeah, I get it. So it's a bit of a moot point. So I think we're fine.
I was going to suggest that from the respective committees be forwarded for discussion at a CAL meeting
That will deal with the 2021 budget.
If you wanted to have that
Yes,
in
that would be a little better. Yeah.
That's a happy friendly.
Okay, so it's in there. I have a hard time getting my years correct, not even knowing what year it is now. Okay, so that's once again another board discussion about mostly electoral area issues, and I will be voting against it. Okay. Is there any further discussion?
So if we vote against this, what's the alternative? Like, what is the alternative? That the staff bring forward the amendments that were suggested today, bring forward another revised copy of this odious grant and aid policy, and then all we get to do is vote against it at the board, and that's it?
So what I think I'll do, though, is put these comments together and recommend to the COW chair that we do have a COW.
Yeah. Yeah, this is getting to be a real sore point with the municipalities, this and a few other issues. I think we need
if we don't deal with this together in a good way, we're just going to fight about it forever. So ultimately, the board has the vote on this, so we need to find a good way together. There's no other workaround.
All right. Didn't mean to slow things down, sorry. Okay, so is there anybody opposed? Carries.
So you're not opposed, Mr. Chair?
I am not going to be opposed, no.
Okay.
The question was asked earlier as to whether or not Chair Babchuk was on this call. Is Chair Babchuk on this call? Dave, do you know?
I'm just looking at the list, and no, she's not.
Okay.
I think
Um,
Unger is the chair of Cal, though, if that's what you're wondering.
No, I'm just wondering, I think because we're in a virtual world, I think it should always be very clear on our listing who is listening in, whether it's 4 people in one person's office or whether it's people calling in as opposed to Teams meeting.
Okay, sorry.
Because I don't believe.
Yeah, no, I
I
get
don't
it.
believe if you call.
I'm in my office alone.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I'm in my
Yeah.
office.
But if I could chip in on that, keeping in mind that these meetings are recorded, they're accessible, anyone can listen to this discussion at any time after the meeting's over. So that, you know, it's open public.
Well, it is until you get into in camera. Okay, so
Yeah.
we move on to area, or sorry, item J, bylaws. Number 352, quadroponics.
Move
Had to
receipt.
find. Okay. On receipt. Okay, moved and seconded. I would just like to say that, you know, this has been deferred and referred and brought back and talked about outside of these meetings ad nauseum, and that I'm very pleased to state that we have come to a collaborative solution in meeting with staff and the applicants. And I have agreed to go ahead with the proposal as presented, which is here before you today. So I just wanted you to be clear on that, that's where we are right now. And I would like to thank staff for their amount of time that they did put into it and the give and take that took place. So here we go. Okay, so on receipt of the report, first of all those in favor? Or no, sorry. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, it's carried. Item B, committee recommend bylaw 352 be presented to the board for, I would like to say, first reading. Is there a problem with that?
I'll support it going to first reading.
I'd like to ask Conoco if there is a problem with that.
Second.
Thank you to the chair. An issue with only giving a recommendation for first reading and holding second?
That's what I'm asking. And the reason that I'm asking to go to first only is because we don't know what we're going to be able to do about setting public hearings. So that comes a little later, but
respectfully to the chair, the recommendation would still be that we provide first and second reading, and when we're in a position to give consideration to public hearings, we would do so at that time. I think it just gives the applicant a little more assurance that we're heading in the right direction, given the amount of time that it's taken to get to this point. Thank you.
Okay, and then I would suggest that you get a recommendation. Motion from one of our members to move B as it is.
So just for procedure, we have a motion on the floor and seconded just for first. Do you want an amendment or you want that rescinded?
I'm suggesting that did it get seconded? I didn't hear the second.
Director Wally, I believe, seconded.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, well then let's.
If I could chip in.
We can withdraw the motion.
I'm supporting first reading only because I was going to ask the staff to provide us in the interim between first and second with a legal opinion regarding the necessity of zoning cannabis when cannabis is a legal product. And I know I've talked to our planner, our manager of planning before, and was told that if cannabis wasn't named as a permitted product in our zoning bylaws, then it's not permitted. Well, there's lots of products. There's lots of agricultural products that are not permitted specifically in our zoning bylaws, and that doesn't mean they're not permitted. And so I don't understand. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt and say that your point is taken, but it is not necessary. The bylaw has to go through in order for a provincial license to be issued. You're talking about the legality at the federal level. This is not that. Okay, so this has to happen one way or the other, yes or no, in order for a license to happen, yes or no. And if I'm incorrect, tell me, Annika, but that's my understanding. And secondly, the regulation of items within a bylaw, you're talking about agricultural products. This is not agricultural land. We're not talking ALR issues at all. So as I understand it, this is the process that has to proceed if there is going to be a license issued by the provincial government in order for this particular applicant to produce cannabis in a building. Is that correct, Tony?
Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
I would sure like to see the legislation in BC that says that before a license is issued for a grow up, that they have to have zoning in place. I haven't seen anything like that.
You can get that from Tom, I'm sure. We received a letter at the board. We received a letter at the board that gave us direction. It was a 1 or 2 page letter and told us we had a couple of options on how to proceed, to not create zoning, to create zoning, whatever, but if we didn't have zoning, there wouldn't be a license. So perhaps question. You can talk to Tom. Was that Nova?
Yeah, if I might. And I must admit, maybe I have got muddled over the many pieces of information I've had generally about the permissibility of cannabis production and sale. But it was my understanding that if a zoning bylaw was silent on the matter and not unpermissive, that the cannabis production was permitted. Annika, is that not the case? Does the zoning bylaw have to expressly permit cannabis production for a license to be issued? That's what I'm now hearing.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we're getting off topic. If the committee wants a report on zoning and provincial approvals, then let's have a resolution, but that's off topic towards this.
Well, I don't think it's off topic because what happens if the local government didn't approve a zone for cannabis, but the upper levels of government both did? And we've run into this before, and it ends up in a legal tangle of our bylaws being ultra virus because they're not following federal and provincial law. Example, fish farms, where we've denied in the past, long time ago, establishment of 3 fish farms up north, and the provincial government just walked right over us and said, no, we have the authority, you do not. So I don't think it's that clear cut.
I would also concur that I think this is germane because the bylaw proposal changes in front of us speak far beyond just this specific spot of zoning. There's amendments throughout the whole zoning bylaw which make non-permissible cannabis production and sale in almost every other circumstance that isn't permitted expressly through the ALC. And if this is truly the route Quadra wants to take, then we'll go to public hearing and we'll hear that. I do not think this is the route that Cortez wants to take, to make it expressly not permitted everywhere unless, you know, specific application is made. So this, what we have in front of us is twofold. One is about a specific spot off West Road, and the other is making it not permissible, really clearly not permissible everywhere else. And so I do think it's really important to understand beyond the specific application, because the zoning bylaw right now, I assume, is silent on the matter of cannabis production, could somebody not get a license? Because I have great caution around making it expressly not permissible everywhere other than this particular place that's applying. Now, I'll defer to the director from the area and obviously the people of Quadra, but it's not the route that I certainly expect Cortez wants to take. So I think it's really important to be clear.
And if
Okay, we're talking about Quadra here, and if I could, I'm going to say that if you are aware of the Local Government Act and zoning bylaws, and Annika, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, if something is not expressly permitted, it is not permitted, not cannabis, anything. If you do not permit body shops in a zone, they are not permitted. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, you're more or less correct with respect to that.
However, my bylaw doesn't speak to tomato production and basil production and thyme production. So what's the difference?
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, I could interject here and just maybe clarify if I could.
Sure, go ahead, Tom. Good luck.
Local zoning bylaws can be constructed in a number of different ways. They can prohibit everything that isn't expressly allowed, or they can take the reverse approach, which is to specifically prohibit certain things. And it really depends on the individual bylaw. And in fact, individual zones within a bylaw can express it differently as well. So it's not necessarily a simple black and white answer to the question. I believe that the planning department has, in this case, looked at the construction of the Quadra zoning bylaw and has concluded that there would be a necessity to go through a rezoning process in order to allow this particular enterprise. And I would take that as being a professional evaluation done as is done with all of such applications, which is not to say the same process would necessarily be followed in a different area if the bylaw is constructed differently. So that's the limit of my knowledge on that, but it's hopefully that will clarify a little bit.
Okay, Annika, you had a note on here you wanted to speak. Are you still wanting to speak?
I only wanted to speak if it was necessary, just to though add on to what Tom has said. This bylaw was specifically crafted on the conversations that have been held previously at EASC and recommended through board with respect to regulations in each individual electoral area. So when this was initially brought forward about 1.5 years ago, staff advised that there was multiple ways or options for each electoral area to address cannabis. And the recommendation was never that each electoral area would take the same route to regulate cannabis, whether to permit it or not allow it to occur throughout the bylaw. This bylaw for Quadra Island was crafted to ensure that there was public input in each and every potential cannabis operation, whether that be production or retail sale. The impetus for this bylaw is a current application, so that's what started this whole thing. But in order to address the request to create a production facility on Quadra, there was a number of regulatory aspects to the bylaw that were required in addition to giving consideration to the permissiveness of the use on this specific parcel. Provincial legislation and bulletins, planning bulletins that have been provided to the planning department have confirmed that if the bylaw does not address cannabis, it is not permitted. We are required to, at a minimum, define cannabis and related activities. If we do not, then we are not able to comment on any application that may come forward for production or a license that is forwarded to us from the province for cannabis retail sales. There is an application currently within the regional district, not electoral area C, but within the regional district for cannabis retail sales. The comments back to the province would have to be that it is not permitted at this time because that specific bylaw is silent on cannabis. For Quadra Island, we determined that we were going to give consideration to cannabis production only and only on this site-specific parcel. We're doing a spot zoning. We are not contemplating production or retail sales anywhere else on Quadra at this time. If in fact there are multiple applications in the future, each and every one of those will go through this process unless we are directed through this public hearing process to do something otherwise. If in fact the public has indicated through the public hearing process that they want to see cannabis everywhere on the island and that's supported by the area director and the board, then that's the way the bylaw will be written, and then we won't need to deal with specific rezoning applications in the future. But with the bylaw presented before you, you are correct, Director Anderson. This would only permit cannabis use on this specific parcel, and each and every application, therefore, would need a rezoning application.
And as the area director, I'd just say that everybody in this process is aware of exactly what Aniko just said. So, you know, this has been beat to death for months and months. And we finally came to an agreement that was suitable for the applicants, the regional district, and the area director to move forward to public hearing. Okay, so that's all we're doing at this point. We're creating a bylaw to go to public hearing, suggesting that this use be permitted on this site. If the public says otherwise, or whatever the public says, that will then be taken into consideration at that time. At this time, we're just trying to get to a public hearing.
May I have
So,
one more comment?
Okay.
So just for absolute clarity, what I'm hearing is that essentially we're going to public hearing on two things. One is allowing cannabis production in this particular spot, and the other is disallowing it everywhere else. And I guess in an ideal reality, I would rather have that first conversation first that wasn't applicant driven, where the community could determine whether it wanted to permit it everywhere, permit it nowhere, or permit it in certain circumstances, and not have that larger discussion born on the back of this applicant. That feels awkward. That being said, I'll support the direction of the area director, but it feels unfortunately backward.
Okay, thank you for your support, Nova, but I would like to say that it isn't two parts, it's one part. It's shall it be permitted in this particular spot zone. It does not speak to the rest of Quadra Island. The rest of Quadra Island would have to come, as Aniko already said, and ask for permission to do this somewhere else. So it's not disallowing it. It's already disallowed anywhere else. Everywhere else. Everywhere, including this place. It's not allowed.
By default, so, not by design.
By default.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Yes, Gerald.
I wonder if we can withdraw the current motion that's asking only for first reading and make that motion again.
I asked that some time ago. I said, can we just withdraw the motion instead of dealing with first reading? Can we just withdraw it? The consent of the mover and the seconder. Is it possible, Tom?
Yes.
I am, as a mover, willing to withdraw. Is the seconder?
Seconder is willing.
Okay, now we can have a new motion, which would be item B.
Director Lee was the mover.
I think Director Lee was the mover.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to first. Oh, whatever. Oh, yeah, okay, that's right. I couldn't
The
move it.
chair can't make a motion. Yes,
sorry,
yeah, you know what? I'm willing to let Quadra be the guinea pigs for this because I've got a couple of them coming up on the agenda. And if we
Okay.
go to public hearing in Quadra, and it'll be like the, if it turns out like the container public hearing, well, then Area D won't have to go through that again.
Move recommendation B.
Okay. Recommendation B has been moved. Is it seconded?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Brenda. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? It is carried.
Move C.
Item C. Okay, is there a seconder?
Second.
Okay, and that public hearing date would be determined at a further date. Okay, any discussion? Anyone opposed? Carried. Okay. Thank you, Hanako. File number 2, number 385, Cordero Channel, for receipt, CAO's report.
Move receipt.
Second.
Receipt.
Okay, any discussion on receipt?
Yes, please.
Okay,
I'm seeing
Go ahead.
in the chat that John could speak to bylaw number 2 if you like, before me.
okay, yes, you're right. That popped up pretty quick there, sorry. Okay, John, do you need to speak to this?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This rezoning application is to facilitate the subdivision of a 71.4 hectare parcel into 6 seasonal residential lots. And this will be on the mainland coast, northwest of Dent Island Lodge. The local Quaker First Nation, which has a reserve not very far, about 2.5 kilometers to the east, however, opposes this development for a number of reasons, including the potential for what they consider a large number of cottages to be established in that area as a result of the subdivision and the associated environmental impacts, motorboat use, and so forth. The proposed zone that we're intending to bring forward, though, would limit the housing on these lots to just the one single-family dwelling and one cottage, which would significantly reduce the number of dwellings that could actually be established there. And the applicants have provided an environmental assessment of their proposed development and how any docks would impact the foreshore environment. The proponents also are planning to have a meeting with the Quaker First Nation in order to discuss the issues raised in the First Nations letter. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, John. Are there any comments from other directors on the receipt of the report, first of all?
Yes, please.
Okay, nobody?
It just seems that it would perhaps be advantageous to just delay further consideration until that meeting happens between the Quaker and the applicant, rather than giving first and second, which, although in our understanding, is only the very beginning of a process, may well look like, we've already rubber stamped it twice to somebody who's not so intimately familiar with our reading process. So I think given all of the strength that First Nations have in land use, that would be advisable at this time.
Okay, I appreciate that comment and I don't disagree with that. Any further comment on receipt? Okay, if I have a comment, should I be making it here, Tom or Dave? Wait for the.
Mr. Chairman, the receipt of the report would be appropriate, depending on the nature of the comment. So I'm not too sure
Okay,
what.
well, all right. Well, my comment is similar to Director Anderson's, and that when we get to B, I think I will just be moving first reading, and then asking that it be deferred until discussions with the First Nation are concluded. This is a serious issue, and I think, you know, with all of our First Nations direction that we're taking as a board, that it would be wise for us to follow through, put our money where our mouth is. So on receipt of the report, any further discussion of that first? Okay, seeing none, nobody opposed, carry. So on B, I would appreciate a motion that, excuse me?
I was just going to move an alternate B, but if you want to speak, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask that an alternate B be moved for first reading with the delay
or deferral of further consideration of the bylaw, pending discussions with the Quechua First Nation. So if that's your motion, go ahead. If you have a different one, go ahead.
If anyone else wants to make that, they're welcome to. I was going to not even do first and just delay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, under the board's procedure bylaw, there are some difficulties moving forward with consultation on a bylaw prior to giving a first reading. And I say that without having that in front of me, but just a cautionary note that to go through a consultation process.
Okay, fair enough. So I would move that bylaw 385 be forwarded to the board for first reading, and then any further consideration of the bylaw be deferred pending discussion with the Quaker First Nation. Thank you, Tom.
Seconder? Is there a seconder? Hearing no seconder, what is your wish? Directors, I have three that I need to have some word from because I can't speak unless I step down.
I don't even think, it's Director Lee speaking, I don't think we should even be giving it first reading until we are sure that we have consulted all the First Nations involved in that territory. If you've been watching the news, you see what's happening in Masset. You know, you see it's not going to be taken very kindly that the regional board's moving forward on an application, even giving it first reading, that already one First Nation has objected to. So I think we need to really do our consultation.
Could I suggest then for some direction to the board that we at least have a motion that asks that bylaw 385 be deferred until the consultations with Quaker Nation are concluded. Something along that line.
Yeah, I'll move that. That any discussions of the draft bylaw 358 be suspended until we have consulted with the First Nations.
Okay, I think the consultation has started, so I think it'd be more appropriate to say that until those consultations are
complete.
Deferred until those consultations are complete.
Consultations with First Nations are complete, that consideration of draft bylaw number 385 be deferred. Of draft bylaw 385 be deferred. period.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
Is that Gerald or Dave?
That's Gerald, yeah.
Okay, sound alike sometimes on this. Okay, so we have a mover, a seconder. Is there discussion?
Yes.
I don't see the name up there, but sure, go ahead.
I really appreciate the caution on this. I think it's very timely and very appropriate. However, I'm also very cautious about what this will mean if this is indeed how we are going to operate going forward for any application before us. Do we do nothing with it until we have consent of all First Nations involved? That's a massive shift in the way that we do land use planning. If that's what we're doing here, I just want us to be really awake to that. Because if we're waiting until all First Nation consultations are complete before we even look at this again, that could be years or forever.
Mr. Chair.
And if we do it here, why wouldn't we do it always?
It's a good point, and I don't know if that could be qualified with the consultations having a time limit, something along those lines like we do with agencies, right? We give them 30 days. If they don't respond, we just write down no response.
Mr. Chair.
So, yeah. Yes, go ahead,
I don't
Gerald.
think in any way this sets a precedent. I mean, this is what Quadra wants to do. Doesn't mean anybody else has to follow suit.
Yeah, it is a tough one.
I appreciate the timeline suggestion. In my discussions on an entirely different matter with the province around timelines for First Nation consultation, they really don't set them. They allow the consultations to run the course that they need to. And yet I don't think it can be indefinite.
Well, the reason that I worded what I said the way I worded it was because there is a consultation taking place. We do have a bylaw before us. We could give it first reading to indicate to the public and the First Nation that this is being considered by the regional district, and we would really like to have the pending discussions completed. So maybe that's the kick in the butt to get everything on the road. I don't know.
So then it should be the pending discussions with the Quaker First Nation completed, because I'm guaranteed, I don't have a map in front of me, but I doubt they're the only First Nation with an interest in the area.
Yeah, well, there may be others that have an interest because I know they have territory there, but we're the only ones that have expressed an interest, according to staff.
Right.
So maybe that would be a good compromise until consultations, until consultations with the Quaker First Nation are complete.
Mr. Chair, if I might comment on this, isn't it the fact that by referring to First Nations and receiving their response that fulfills the obligation for consultation, and that every citizen would have equal right to further express their concerns at the public hearing?
I believe it does.
Well, then I think that this motion is out of order and that it should be defeated.
Can I ask for some staff comment on this, please?
Let's keep in mind it's also 11:24.
What would
Is there
you
going to be
like?
a staff comment?
What on what? What would you like us to comment on?
Just the appropriateness of this. You can obviously hear us wrestling with the appropriateness, the sequencing, the timing, the length of consultation time, Quaker versus all First Nation, just any professional recommendation from yourself, CEO, or planning staff would be really appreciated at this critical juncture?
I think they're all considerations and they're all appropriate. What Gerald just said is accurate. However, saying that, you know, we realize there's optics towards this as well. So, you know, we have consultation. Further input can come from public hearing. I agree with Director Anderson, though, the giving it first and second reading looked like support that made optics that we want to portray. I think the motion that provides consultation, further consultation and bylaw prior to consideration of the bylaw is appropriate. So I think this is, you know, everybody's right in this instance.
Sorry, you trailed off there, Dave. What did you say at the end? Everybody.
Well, I think what everyone said is appropriate. It's a bit of a challenging.
Tom would like to speak.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to add and remind the committee that the process set out in the board's procedure bylaw is set out that way for a reason. And I think you mentioned a few minutes ago that by giving a bylaw first reading, it merely puts it on the table. And if you're going to go out for consultation, then at least there is something to say this is now being considered. Prior to first reading, there's no inclination or suggestion that the board is even serious about moving forward with anything. So I think it is something to consider as you wrestle with the issue of whether the chicken or the egg should come first here. I think there needs to be some indication before you go to consultation that there is in fact something on the table to be consulted about.
And on the heels of that, I personally feel if you gave it first reading and left it at that and continued consultation, that would be appropriate. However, that motion was on and it wasn't seconded.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would agree with the CAO on this. I think first reading would be appropriate and that we should just leave it at that and this motion should just disappear.
So I'd happily make my motion again if somebody wanted to second it.
Well, first of all, we need to dispose of the motion on the table.
Go ahead.
We're going to withdraw
That's
or
what
we're
you
going
want.
to defeat it.
If that's what you want, if the director for the area wants that, then go right ahead.
Yeah. But it would be good to get rid of this motion.
You know, I think we should be clear that we're giving it first reading and holding it there until we find out what the objections are.
That's where I want to get to.
Yeah, holding it at first reading.
Okay,
like,
so
I don't think you have to change this motion. Consideration of bylaw number 385, rather than be deferred, be held at first reading. Be held at first reading. Period.
But we'd have to give it
first reading. Okay.
Yeah. So I think the staff recommendation just limited to first reading would be appropriate. So if the mover wants to, and the second want to withdraw this motion,
go ahead.
Yeah, let's withdraw it. Yep.
Okay, the motion has been withdrawn. And Dave, you're saying that you could move the motion as printed in B first.
We're withdrawing second. I'm not looking at it right now, but I believe it said first and second. So just limiting it to first.
So I'm happy
second reading
back on the floor what I had on the floor before, which is simply that bylaw number 385 be forwarded to the board for first reading, and that any further consideration of the bylaw be deferred pending discussion with the Quaker First Nation.
Correct.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it says right there. So we got a mover, we got a seconder.
Can I ask a legal question through the chair to our corporate officer? So if we get information back from the Kwakiutl that they don't like, the reasons they don't like the bylaw, and there's necessity to change or amend the bylaw, can we just amend it at first and then proceed to second when it's acceptable? Can we amend it at first? Or do we have to withdraw the whole bylaw or defeat the whole bylaw and start again?
Mr. Chairman, if you allow me to speak without a seconder for the motion, I can quickly say that the board can make amendments to any bylaw up until it has been given third reading at any time.
Okay,
Okay,
all right.
there you. All right, is there a seconder to the motion? I thought I got one.
No.
I thought Brenda said she seconded it.
Okay, I'll second it.
Mr. Chair, if I could speak.
Go ahead, Gerald.
No, thank you. Yeah, I'm opposed to that motion because of the second half of it. If we put a period after first reading, I could support it. But we can continue to consult without having made a motion to that effect that binds us to something. We don't need to be bound to it. Just pass first reading and leave it at that.
I agree.
I support the motion as presented because it gives a very strong indication that we've received and are taking into strong consideration the communication from the Quaker First Nation. I think that's entirely appropriate.
Disagreed.
Okay, well, as the area director for this particular application, I agree with comments Nova just made. It does give us indication. It does, as Tom mentioned earlier, gives the ability to move forward with working on this bylaw to whatever degree you need to, and then it doesn't bind us to anything except for further consideration
happening prior to the pending discussions. It's consent or consultation or anything. It's pending discussions with the Quaker First Nation. So I support it, and I will support it. And I think we probably had enough chatter about it. So I'm going to call a question. All those opposed?
I'm opposed.
I'm opposed.
Gerald and Brenda are opposed. In favor? Myself?
And myself.
Okay, so it's 2 opposed, 2 in favor. That means it's defeated. Is that correct, Tom?
That's correct.
That is
So
correct.
I would
And
then
first reading.
forward the motion that bylaw number 385 be forwarded to the board for first reading, period.
Second.
Moved and seconded, discussion. All those in favor? Opposed, carried, onward. Okay, that was B, right? Cortez Island First Responder Service.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay, anything on the receipt by the CAO?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Just same comments as before with the hall contracts. Thank you.
yeah, the only question I have is this is the one where you actually go out and train first responders, correct?
Mr. Chair, if I may add to this, this is just an addition to the first responder service that the fire department is providing. That was part of the referendum that we held, so not really much to negotiate or discuss. Just service to the bylaw.
Well, I'm good. Okay. Any opposed to receipt? On to B, be forwarded to the board. That be given first
Move B.
readings and adopted.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any opposition? Carried. Okay, K, correspondence, North Quadra Island burning survey.
Move
for
receipt.
receipt.
Second.
Okay, is there any action that needs to come out of this, Tom?
Mr. Chairman, no, in a sense, essentially we will be looking at what future engagement looks like per the last report that went to the board. And so Obviously, any suggestions, considerations, points of view that were not captured in the survey itself are not barred from being part of that evaluation. So we will be bringing a report back to look at what that engagement looks like going forward.
Okay, so there will be a further report. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. Okay, on the correspondence, anyone opposed? All those in favor? Carries. And we have under new business library, first of all, real quick.
Real quick, the library is opening its doors in some of the locations on a restricted basis, dealing with the COVID work safe directives. We opened Harborfront, and other branches are opening. So if you want to see when your local branch is going to be open and available to pick up hard copies of materials, just go to vrl.bc.ca to the website for Vancouver Island Regional Library, and they have the hours of access. It's quite restricted hours, and it's quite restricted walkthroughs to pick up materials or takeout service, and everything is quarantined after being received. So like if you're returning books, they're quarantined for 72 hours. So it's not the same service it was before, not yet, but we're aiming to get there.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. And if I may make a comment. I absolutely disagree with the policy to reopen at this time. We're still in a pandemic. And with the things that are happening this week, the numbers going up. We have a public health officer that is looking very worried. And at 3 o'clock today, there will be a in-person briefing as opposed to just written numbers. There's going to be some commentary concerning the worry of what's going on right now with increases. So I'm not in favor of further exposure to the public through the library system, which is heavily used on Quadra Island. And we do not code cases happening on Quadra and Cortez. So, Cortez may feel differently. That's my comment, and that's all I'm going to say. We don't need any discussion about it.
Well, I agree with him on this one.
Yeah, the library is following a very careful, it's not flinging the doors open to the facilities. It's a very careful, slight reopening of our books. And of course, there's the e-library available.
If I could make a comment, Mr. Chair.
I hear a bunch of noise.
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when the virus initially happened, these restrictions were put on a lot of public facilities like the library for a good reason. People tend to believe that perhaps we flatten the curve and things are going to improve drastically and they're starting to reopen. I personally think they're making a big mistake. I think we're just getting started on this virus. I think it's going to get an awful lot worse in the near term. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, well, none of the decisions in the reopening plan that the library board did endorse are immutable. If there's a change in the environment that makes it very dangerous, then we will be moving back to the original position of closing again. But right now, we have a committee of 12 people that are some employees of the library system and executives and WorkSafe BC, and looking very carefully at safety precautions in moderate reopening. So it's not up to me.
Said, disagree with that.
Yeah, but it's not.
Disagree with that. You've laid it out. We get it, and there's been disagreement lodged with you as the chair of the board. That's all we need. We're done.
Yeah, if there's another question comes up, I'll make sure your views are expressed to them.
I
But
approve.
yeah,
Okay, on to addendum. Monica, you wanted to speak to this cannabis production and sale in electoral area D. There's a report from the CAO to be received. All those, anybody opposed to receiving it? Any comments? Okay, Monica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item before you is in response to two applications that are to come forward to electoral area D, EASC potentially, should there not be amendments to the current bylaw number 1404, the Campbell River Area Zoning Bylaw. As discussed previously, this zoning bylaw is silent on cannabis. It does not define cannabis. It does not give definitions for associated uses. It does not contemplate either production nor retail sales. The area director is aware of both an application for production and retail sales within electoral area D. We have had conversations specifically with respect to a proposal for cannabis production. Through those conversations, it was made clear that although historically at EASC, there wasn't support from the director to give consideration to regulation within the zoning bylaw, in order to address these two proposals, there would be a need to do so now. It was presented to the director that we had two choices. The first would be to advise any proposals that formally were accepted by the regional district that they would need to apply for a rezoning application, or we could action a amendment to the zoning bylaw to give consideration to cannabis production and retail sales. Discussions that have been held with the regional district staff, area director, and one of the proponents indicated that there would be some level of support through the area director to consider cannabis production in association with agriculture, in that where retail sales are permitted through zoning, that those would potentially include the sale of cannabis. So what staff is proposing is to avoid having to give consideration to multiple rezoning applications and multiple amendment bylaws that would be separate in nature, given one being for cannabis production and one being for retail sales, that we provide a more holistic approach that would probably provide additional clarity to the community to give consideration to cannabis production and retail sales by preparing a amendment bylaw that would define cannabis regulation, allow for it in certain areas where agricultural use is permitted, where 5 acres or more of land mass is in effect, and where retail is permitted in commercial uses to permit cannabis retail sales. So in effect, the bylaw would allow for production where you could produce any other type of agricultural product at 5 acres or more, and it would allow for retail sales only where currently retail sales is permitted in a commercial zone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that briefing. This is just a prelude, so we don't need to get into it too deeply, I don't think. I screwed up and I forgot to ask, shall the addendum items be accept or considered?
So moved.
Motion. Seconder. Seconder.
I was just a little taken at, I'll just shut up about it, but I didn't get my addendum until 2:30 yesterday.
And we're just
Hello?
considering the items. You're muted.
I think I'm not. I'm not muted.
No, you're not.
I just got the addendum at 2:30 yesterday afternoon. But
the only addendum that I see, folks, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm seeing item N, addendum items, that the addendum item be considered.
Yeah.
The addendum item is cannabis production and sale, correct?
Yeah, right.
All I'm asking is procedurally, according to Dave and Tom, I screwed up and didn't say
Shall the addendum item be considered? I need a motion to do so.
And I moved it.
That's not
Seconded it.
moved and seconded. No objection. We're moving on to the item, which was cannabis. Now, we had the report. It was received. And now there is item B, which is the committee recommended amendment bylaw, blah, blah, blah.
Is there a motion to do that?
So can I ask through the chair to our planning manager, where these applications for cannabis retail sales and production have been applied for through the federal and provincial authorities, and they're ready to go. Now the regional district wants to insert itself into the process and rezone it. I just, something, it makes me wonder why the regional district would want to do a rezone of a legal product. It may not be named in our bylaw as permitted, but neither are cucumbers or tomatoes or anything else that grows. So I don't see that the local government should be, personally, that it should be inserting itself into the approval process. I think we might, and the question I was going to ask to the lead planner was, are there applications to you for rezoning that have been submitted already on the two applications?
Through the chair, we have received a rezoning application for production, and we are in receipt of a license for retail sales, both within Area D.
Is that all they need then? Like the one to license a retail sale, is that all they need? Like they're in a commercial area as it is, so.
Correct.
That's all they need?
Correct.
Okay, if this is meant to assist those applicants to get their production and to get their sales underway after all they've been through and the thousands of dollars they've spent meeting federal and provincial guidelines and rules, then let's go ahead with it. But I don't see I don't see the regional district really changing the direction of what the federal and provincial governments are doing by zoning.
Are you moving?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll
for the
move it.
last,
Yeah, I'll move it.
okay.
I'll second B, and I have a question.
Okay, no, but go ahead. I see your question, please.
Yeah, super quick. Support this entirely. And just with regards to Area B, when this came up a year or so ago, we decided to move forward in Area C in one form, in Area B, sending it to the existing zoning bylaw update process, and then not doing anything with Area D, which is now being amended, and I support. But I'm just asking, given that the zoning bylaw update on Cortez has not advanced in a year and a half, would we consider then this process as well for Area B so it doesn't remain unattended indefinitely?
Are you asking that this be amended to say electoral areas B and D?
No, not at this time. I don't want to muddle the issue, but I'm asking of staff, where are we at with B, given that nothing is happening, and would they consider bringing forward a similar recommendation for Area B?
Through the chair, at the direction of the area director or committee, staff could bring forward a similar proposed amendment bylaw for Area B outside of the current zoning bylaw review.
Okay, I guess I would just request a meeting with staff then to talk about the zoning bylaw review and where we're at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On B, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any opposition? All those in favor? I'm sorry. I just can't get away from that. All right, so it's passed. Termination.
No termination.
Second.
Any opposition? Good, we're done.